My daughter denied me food on Christmas Eve, saying I didn't contribute, so I took my revenge. Before we begin today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us keep creating. My name is Evelyn Hartman. I suppose most people would just call me Eve, though my grandchildren, bless their little hearts, always say, Grandma Eve, tell us a story. And oh, how I've told stories. Some of them are bright, like ribbons of sunlight through the old maple trees in our backyard. Others are heavy, the kind that stick in your chest long after the fire's gone out and the tea's grown cold in your cup. This one, this one has the kind of bitter sweetness that only comes from a Christmas Eve, a family gathering, and the quiet, sharp sting of rejection from someone you gave your whole life to. I live alone now, in a small house in Cedar Grove, a sleepy town in Indiana, where the winters are long and the snow falls like whispers from another world. The streets are empty most evenings, and the wind carries that kind of chill that seeps into your bones. It's here, in this quiet, that I think back on that particular Christmas Eve, the one that would change the way I looked at my daughter forever. Her name is Marissa, my only child. I brought her into this world during a blizzard, much like the one Cedar Grove is known for, the kind that hushes everything down, so only the heart's beat seems audible. I held her close under the flickering light of the hospital room, murmuring promises to love her and keep her safe, and I meant every word. I wanted to protect her from the world, from pain, from the little cruelties that life sneaks up on you when you're not looking. And for the most part, I did. I raised her as best I could after her father, he left. Gone one morning like smoke, leaving only a note and a bitter taste of abandonment behind. I don't like to dwell on the man, but I do dwell on the child. Marissa grew up strong-willed, clever, sharp as a tack, and stubborn enough to challenge me from the age of 6 onward. I remember her first Christmas, when she refused to open her present on Christmas morning, insisting it wasn't the right time. I laughed then, thinking it was cute, a quirk of her personality. Later, I realized that stubbornness would be both our gift and our curse. By the time that fateful Christmas Eve rolled around, Marissa was 32, living in a sleek little apartment across town with her fiancé, Jeremy. I had always been close to them. At least I thought I had. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. I made her favorite dishes every year. Roast chicken with the rosemary and lemon she loved, mashed potatoes so creamy they practically melted in your mouth, my grandmother's stuffing recipe, and of course my apple pie. Sweet, spicy, and warm. I poured my heart into those meals because feeding someone for me is the same as loving them. And I always thought Marissa understood that. That year, I decided to bring a few things with me. I had baked my pies, made the cranberry sauce, and even prepared the cinnamon rolls that we would all wake up to the next morning. I packed them carefully in Tupperware, lined them in soft cloth, and drove over to Marissa's apartment, humming old Christmas carols under my breath. I felt a warmth that comes from anticipation, the kind that makes you think the world is just as it should be, that everything is safe inside the bubble of family. I knocked on her door, the familiar chime echoing in the hallway. I could hear laughter inside, Jeremy's deep chuckle blending with Marissa's lighter one. I smiled to myself. This was what I had wanted all day, to be surrounded by my little family, to sit together and share stories, to smell the cinnamon and the pine and the warmth of the holiday all wrapped in one moment. When Marissa opened the door, though, oh, my heart stumbled. Her face wasn't angry. Not exactly. But there was a sharpness there that cut me deeper than any raised voice ever could. "Hi, Mom," she said, her tone clipped. Not the warm, inviting voice I had imagined, but polite, almost like she was letting a stranger in. "Come on in, but I need to talk to you first." I stepped inside cautiously, feeling the chill of her words before I even noticed the heat of the radiator. I set down my Tupperware with a soft thud, glancing around at the meticulously clean apartment. Everything gleamed, every cushion perfectly fluffed, every decoration perfectly in place. I smiled, trying to smooth over the sudden unease curling in my chest. Marissa's eyes met mine, and I could see it there. The judgment. Not the judgment of a parent scolding a child. No, this was different. This was the judgment of someone who believed they had earned the moral high ground, someone who thought they were measuring another person's worth. "Mom," she said finally, after a long pause that made my stomach twist. I don't think you should eat with us tonight, I blinked. Excuse me? She crossed her arms, biting her lip, her eyes a storm I couldn't read. I don't think it's appropriate. You didn't contribute this year. You haven't been helping around, and Christmas is, I don't know, it's supposed to feel fair. Fair, that word. It stabbed at me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I laughed softly, a hollow sound, trying to make it into a joke so my heart wouldn't crack. Marissa, you know I brought the pies. I made the stuffing. I spent all day cooking for you. Her face remained hard, unmoving. It's not enough, Mom. I mean, it's not like you've been helping with anything else. You didn't chip in for decorations. You didn't volunteer for the food drive. You didn't. She trailed off, but the accusation hung there like a thick fog. I felt tears prick my eyes, though I swallowed them quickly. I had raised her, nurtured her, carried her through illnesses, scraped knees, heartbreaks, college applications, and late-night study sessions. I had given her my time, my love, my very self, and now on Christmas Eve, she reduced me to a guest unworthy of sharing a meal. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand that she understand, that she remember all the years I had sacrificed, all the nights I had stayed awake worrying, all the days I had baked cookies while she played in the snow. But instead, I turned away quietly. I packed up my Tupperware and my pride and left her apartment with a soft, trembling step. The snow was falling when I stepped outside, each flake like a tiny reprimand from the sky. My fingers were cold, my heart colder. I had expected warmth, laughter, the smell of roasting chicken, but instead I had been shown the sharp edge of rejection. I drove home in silence, letting the wind whip across the windshield, listening to the hum of the tires on the icy road. And as I sat alone that night, staring at the dim glow of my kitchen light, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger, not the kind that makes you yell or throw things, but a quiet, simmering resolve. I realized, with a clarity that startled me, that love is a strange, fragile thing. It can be given freely, but it can also be ignored, denied, even scorned. And yet, there is power in patience, in planning, in the gentle, unassuming ways the universe gives us chances for correction. I began to think about what Christmas really meant. Not the gifts, not the decorations, not the curated perfection of social media ready images. No, Christmas was about presence. It was about contribution. It was about the quiet acts that bind people together, that say without words, I see you, I love you, I care. And if someone refused to see you, well, sometimes the world has its own way of teaching lessons. That night, I began to craft my plan. Not a plan born of malice exactly, more of a plan born of necessity. Because love denied can fester into sorrow, but sorrow can be transformed into something else, something meaningful. Something that would make Marissa see, in the way only life can teach, that the heart cannot be measured in chores done or presents bought. I won't lie, I didn't sleep much that night. I sat by my kitchen window staring at the snow, letting my mind wander through the corridors of memory, through every Christmas we had shared, through every meal I had prepared, through every scraped knee I had kissed better. And with each memory, a quiet resolve took root. By the time the clock struck midnight, I had made my decision. Christmas would come. It would be shared. It would be tasted, felt, remembered, but on my terms. And I smiled then, a slow, soft smile, like the kind a cat gives when it knows a secret that no one else does. I suppose this is where the story truly begins. Not at the moment of rejection, but at the moment of realization. The quiet spark that turns heartbreak into resolve. The snow continued to fall and I watched it, knowing that tomorrow, Christmas Eve, would be different. I woke the next morning to a pale winter light spilling through my lace curtains. The world outside my window was still dressed in white, and the air smelled faintly of pine from the wreath I'd hung on my door last week. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the steam curl around my face like an old, comforting hug. My hands shook just a little, though I told myself it was from the cold. Truthfully, it was more than that. My mind was alive with possibility, a soft, simmering energy that felt almost like electricity in my chest. I went about my morning ritual mechanically, feeding my cat, Lily, who meowed impatiently for her breakfast, washing dishes, setting out the mail. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Marissa. I tried not to let bitterness take root, but the sting of her words from the night before was still fresh, like a paper cut that refuses to heal. I kept seeing her face, the sharp tilt of her chin, the judgment in her eyes, and yet beneath that hurt, something else had begun to bloom, a quiet determination. I would not let her rejection define me. I had spent 32 Christmases pouring my heart into our family traditions, and one dismissive evening would not undo all of that. No, I decided, sipping my coffee slowly, setting down the cup with care, I would remind her, gently, indirectly. The universe has a funny way of teaching lessons, and sometimes lessons don't need to be shouted to be heard. By mid-morning, I was fully immersed in my preparations. I started with the basics, my rolling pin, a bowl of flour, and my grandmother's recipe book open to the page marked by a faded ribbon. My hands moved with familiarity, pressing dough into shapes I had learned in childhood, forming circles and crescents, humming the old hymns that always accompanied these quiet rituals. There was comfort in the rhythm of it, a reminder that some things in life remain steady, even when the heart feels unsteady. I thought about the meals I had prepared last night for Marissa and Jeremy, now sitting untouched in the cold of her apartment. And I realized something. I didn't need her acceptance to validate my efforts. I had fed her for decades, held her through fevers, celebrated every milestone, and tucked her into bed when the nightmares came. My love had never been conditional. Perhaps this, too, was part of the lesson I needed to teach, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through presence, patience, and persistence. I decided I would invite myself to Christmas Eve dinner again. Not with anger, not with accusations, but with a plan to gently demonstrate my worth. I would arrive with a dish she could not ignore, something so imbued with care, with tradition, with the essence of my love, that she would be forced to reckon with it. I would let the food speak for me. By early afternoon, I was deep into my preparations. I made a batch of gingerbread cookies, each one decorated with care, the icing forming delicate patterns that reminded me of the frost on my window panes in winter. I baked another apple pie, smaller than the one I had made for Marissa's apartment, but no less perfect. I wrapped everything carefully, tying them with ribbons I had kept from years past. Every ribbon, every sprinkle of sugar, every fold in the napkin was an unspoken message. I am here, I am present, I am loved. Then, around 3 in the afternoon, I called Marissa. I debated it for a long time before dialing, my hand hovering over the phone as though the decision itself were a test of my patience. Finally, I pressed the buttons. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice still carrying that edge of formality. "Mom," she said, and I detected a surprise beneath her tone. "Is everything okay?" I smiled, though she could not see it. "Everything is fine, sweetheart. I just thought I'd drop by with a few things for dinner. Some treats I think you'll like." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her calculating, weighing the situation. Finally, she said, We already have everything set. Really, Mom, you don't need to." I laughed softly, a gentle, warm sound like the crackle of a fire in the hearth. "Nonsense, it won't take up much space. I'll be there soon." I hung up, feeling a thrill of quiet triumph. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was subtle, strategic. I would show her that love and contribution are not always measured in chores or monetary value. They are measured in the effort, in the heart, in the intention behind every little act. The drive to her apartment was a slow one. The roads were slick with ice, and the snow reflected the pale winter light like powdered sugar. I hummed a soft tune to myself, a lullaby. I used to sing to Marissa when she was small, and when I arrived, I carried my carefully packed dishes into her apartment, stepping lightly so as not to announce my presence too boldly. Marissa and Jeremy were in the living room, setting up the table. The sight of them made my chest ache with a mixture of longing and sorrow. They looked happy, so happy, and for a moment I almost questioned my plan. Was I being petty? Was I letting my hurt dictate my actions? But then I saw the small signs of their joy. The gleam in Marissa's eyes as she arranged the centerpiece, the way Jeremy laughed at a joke she made. It was beautiful, yes, but it was incomplete. Something essential was missing. An acknowledgement of the years, of the sacrifices, of the love that had built the foundation beneath their happiness. I cleared my throat softly. "Marissa? Jeremy?" Marissa looked up, startled. Her eyes widened slightly, and Jeremy turned, frowning in confusion. Mom, she said, her voice faltering. I smiled, holding up the first of my dishes. I thought you might like some gingerbread cookies, freshly baked. Her frown softened, though there was still a faint tension in her jaw. Oh, thank you, Mom. That's thoughtful. I continued, placing the pie on the counter, then the cinnamon rolls, then the carefully wrapped cranberry sauce. I know you said I didn't contribute yesterday, I said gently, but I think perhaps this counts as a contribution. It's made with love, and, well, isn't that what matters most at Christmas? Jeremy nodded politely, but it was Marissa's reaction that truly mattered to me. She hesitated, then reached out, touching the ribbon on one of the dishes. Her hand lingered for a moment, and I could see her softening, her defenses beginning to crumble. You did all this? She asked, her voice small, almost uncertain. I nodded, my own voice soft. Yes, sweetheart, every bit of it. I thought, maybe this year, we could remember that Christmas isn't about fairness or lists. It's about presence, about the heart you put into the things you do for one another. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought she might speak, might apologize, might acknowledge the hurt she had caused. But instead, she simply pulled me into a hug, and I felt the warmth of her embrace, the familiar squeeze of her arms around me. It wasn't the apology I had wanted exactly, but it was enough. It was acknowledgement. It was love. We set the table together, side by side, arranging the dishes with care. I watched as Marissa tasted a piece of pie, and the faintest smile flickered across her face. Mom, this is really good, she said softly. I smiled, feeling the familiar ache of joy mixed with the sting of memory. I had won, yes, but not through confrontation or anger. I had won through love, through patience, through a quiet insistence that some things, the most important things, cannot be ignored or dismissed. And as we sat down to our meal, the snow falling silently outside, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in retaliation. It's in showing up, in being true to yourself, in letting your love speak louder than any argument or accusation ever could. That Christmas Eve, I didn't just reclaim my place at the table. I reminded my daughter and perhaps myself that the heart remembers what the mind sometimes forgets. And in that quiet, gentle way, I found my own form of vindication. Not in her guilt, not in her shame, but in the undeniable, unspoken truth that I had given everything I had to the ones I loved, and that love would always be enough. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversation, laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warmth of family. I watched Marissa, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed fully, and I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. The universe had a way of balancing itself, and sometimes the lesson comes wrapped not in punishment, but in gentle revelation. As the clock struck midnight and the first notes of Christmas carols floated softly from the stereo, I realized something I hadn't known before. Sometimes love is the ultimate revenge, and sometimes it's also the ultimate gift. The days that followed that Christmas Eve were strange in a way that only the aftermath of a quiet revelation can be. Cedar Grove was still wrapped in snow, the streets glistening under the pale winter sun, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and pine, as if the town itself were holding its breath. I spent my mornings in my small kitchen, washing dishes, sipping coffee, and staring out the window at the world, thinking about Marissa, thinking about love, thinking about how easily even the closest hearts can drift apart if the threads that bind them are not tended with care. Marissa called me the day after Christmas. I remember it clearly. My hands were dusted with flour from a batch of cinnamon rolls. I was preparing for the freezer, and Lily, my cat, was curled up in her favorite spot on the windowsill, watching me with her sharp green eyes. The phone rang, and I hesitated only a moment before answering. Hi, Mom, Marissa said, her voice soft, tentative, almost unfamiliar in its hesitation. Hello, sweetheart, I replied gently. How are you today? There was a pause, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. I just wanted to say thank you for Christmas Eve, for the food, for everything, really. I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. You're very welcome, Marissa. I only ever want to give you love. There was another pause. Mom, I don't know what came over me. I shouldn't have said what I did. It was wrong. I could feel my heart constrict, that sharp little pang of recognition that comes with the weight of years. Oh, darling, I said softly, it's all right. We all say things we don't mean when we're caught up in our own ideas of fairness or expectation. What matters is that we're here now. Her voice cracked, and I could hear the faintest whimper, the tremor of emotion she'd been holding back. I just, I didn't realize how much I've taken for granted. You've given me everything, Mom, and I didn't see it. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. It's all right, Marissa. Sometimes it takes a moment like that to remember. Love doesn't always need acknowledgement, but it's nice when it's recognized. That conversation marked a turning point for us, though I didn't fully understand it at the time. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes. Marissa would call more often, not just for practical matters or casual greetings, but for advice, for stories, for the kind of quiet connection we'd shared when she was a child. She started asking me to teach her some of my old recipes, the ones I had perfected over decades, the ones that held memories of her father, of her childhood, of our family gathered around the table. One afternoon, about a week after Christmas, she invited me to her apartment again. I remember walking up the familiar hallway, my heart feeling both heavy and light at once, a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. I knocked softly, and Marissa opened the door, her expression uncertain but welcoming. Mom, she said, stepping aside to let me in. I, I want to cook with you today. Can we do that? I smiled, feeling a warmth that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Of course, sweetheart. What shall we make? She thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Let's make the apple pie, the one you always make for Christmas. I want to learn it properly. We moved to her kitchen together, unpacking the ingredients, washing our hands, and beginning the familiar rhythm of cooking. There was something almost sacred about it, the way flour dusted the counters like fresh snow, the way the apples glistened in the sunlight streaming through the window, the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg filling the space around us. I guided her hands, showing her how to press the dough just so, how to layer the apples evenly, how to sprinkle sugar and spice in a way that transformed simple ingredients into something comforting and unforgettable. As we worked, she asked me questions, not just about the pie, but about life, about love, about mistakes and regrets. Mom, she said softly, her hands dusted with flour, have you ever felt like you weren't enough? Like maybe no matter what you did, it wouldn't matter? I paused, taking a moment to consider my words. Yes, darling, I admitted. I've felt that way more times than I can count. But then I realized that being enough isn't about what others say or do. It's about what you give, quietly, sincerely, without expectation. And sometimes it takes a little time for others to see that. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful, as if she were absorbing something far beyond the mechanics of pie making. There was a softness to her, a vulnerability that she rarely allowed anyone to see. And in that moment, I understood that the lesson I had intended to teach her through Christmas Eve's quiet confrontation had taken root. She was beginning to see slowly that love cannot be measured in chores or checks on a list. It is measured in presence, in patience, in care. When the pie was finally in the oven, we sat at the counter, sipping tea and watching the sunlight shift across the room. The tension that had existed between us seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet understanding. Marissa reached across and took my hand, holding it gently. Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I'm sorry for how I treated you. I didn't realize how much you've always done for me. I squeezed her hand, smiling, feeling the familiar ache of a mother's love. It's all right, sweetheart. What matters is that you see it now. That afternoon, I realized that the quiet form of revenge I had chosen, showing up, contributing, giving love without expectation, was far more powerful than any argument, any harsh word, any act of retaliation could have been. It was subtle, yes, but it worked. And more importantly, it healed. Not just me, but her too. In the days that followed, our relationship began to shift. Marissa invited me to more gatherings, included me in her plans, and even began to share her own struggles with me. She spoke of work pressures, of Jeremy's family, of moments when she felt overwhelmed or unappreciated, and I listened, as I always had, with patience and love. One afternoon, as we were sitting by the fireplace in my living room, sipping cocoa and watching the snow fall outside, she turned to me with a hesitant expression. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, darling, I replied. She took a deep breath, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her sweater. Do you ever regret it? Everything you've done for me? All the sacrifices? I smiled softly, thinking of the long nights, the endless meals, the scraped knees, the tears, the laughter. No, sweetheart, not once. Every bit of it was worth it, because loving you, well, it's the most natural thing in the world. And seeing you grow, seeing the person you've become, that's all the reward I need. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I think I'm starting to understand. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. And that's all right, I said gently. Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we need them most. Sometimes the lesson comes through rejection, sometimes through patience, sometimes through the quiet realization that love cannot be measured or denied. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind outside, to the soft creak of the old house settling, to the faint hum of the radiator. And in that silence, I felt something profound, a sense of peace, a sense of closure, a sense that the quiet, patient revenge I had chosen had worked its magic not through harm, but through love. That night, as I drove home through the snowy streets of Cedar Grove, I reflected on the strange twists life takes. How easily hearts can be hurt, how quickly misunderstandings can grow, how the smallest acts of kindness, patience, and persistence can mend even the deepest wounds. I realized that the true power of love lies not in confrontation or punishment, but in its quiet, steadfast presence. And as I unlocked my door and stepped inside my warm, familiar home, I knew that this Christmas, this one unlike any other, had given me a gift far greater than any I could have imagined. The restoration of my bond with my daughter, and the profound understanding that love, when given freely and without expectation, has the power to heal even the deepest of hurts. The days after that Christmas felt like the world itself had shifted slightly, though nothing outwardly seemed different. Cedar Grove remained the same sleepy town, the snow still thick on the streets, and the familiar sound of the wind against my windows filling my small house with its icy lullaby. But within me, a subtle warmth had begun to spread, the kind of warmth that comes from having endured a sharp hurt and found your way through it, quietly, without shouting, without confrontation. I began to notice things about Marissa I had taken for granted before. The way she would text me in the morning, just a line or two asking how I was. The way she would call in the evenings, even when she was busy with work or Jeremy's family. There was an unspoken acknowledgement in her voice now, a recognition of the years I had spent loving her, of the quiet presence I had maintained even when she hadn't wanted it. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It was on a particularly cold afternoon that I realized the full scope of what had changed. I had decided to bring over a batch of cookies for Marissa and Jeremy, just because. I wrapped them carefully, tied them with a ribbon, and placed them in my little car, driving slowly down the snow-dusted streets. When I arrived at her apartment, she opened the door almost immediately. Her face lit up in a way that made my chest ache with both joy and sorrow. "Mom," she exclaimed, her arms opening to welcome me. Come in, come in. You didn't have to." I smiled, stepping inside. The warmth of the apartment hit me, the smell of something cooking in the oven blending with the faint aroma of pine from a small artificial tree in the corner. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly, "but I wanted to." She looked at me for a long moment, and I felt her searching for something in my expression. The act of giving, of caring, of being present, it matters. Even if no one acknowledges it, even if it feels like it's for nothing, it's never for nothing. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think I'm finally starting to see that. I don't want to take you for granted anymore, Mom. I reached across the counter and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers. Darling, all any of us want is to be seen, to be acknowledged. And now that you do, well, that's enough for me. The rest of the afternoon passed in a quiet, steady rhythm. We laughed when a cookie fell off the tray. We tasted the dough when we thought no one was looking, and we reminisced about Christmases past, about the tree in our living room when she was small, about the ornaments she had made in kindergarten, about the first time she had insisted on placing the star on the tree all by herself. It was a gentle, healing time, the kind of moment that stitches the heart back together with invisible threads. As the cookies baked, I found myself reflecting on the nature of love, of family, and of the subtle ways we influence one another. Marissa had learned a lesson, yes, but I had learned one too. I realized that revenge, in its truest and quietest form, doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it is simply the act of continuing to give, to exist in the fullness of your own integrity, to let the warmth of your presence remind others of the love they once overlooked. That evening, as I drove home, the snow falling lightly against my windshield, I felt a profound sense of contentment. The frost on the trees sparkled like crystals in the fading light, and I felt the faintest shiver of joy mixed with melancholy. There had been a pain, yes, but it had been transformed into something greater, a reconnection, a revelation, a quiet victory that required no malice or bitterness. Over the next few weeks, our interactions grew even more meaningful. Marissa invited me to help with holiday preparations for her office party, and she began asking me for advice not just about cooking, but about life. She confided in me about Jeremy, about her colleagues, about moments when she had felt lost or uncertain. And I listened, as I always had, with patience, with love, with the quiet understanding that sometimes the best guidance comes not in words, but in presence. One evening, as we were sitting together on her couch after a long day of decorating, she turned to me with a hesitant expression. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, darling, I said, smiling gently. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. Do you ever feel lonely, even with me around? I considered this carefully, feeling the weight of years behind the question. Sometimes, yes, I admitted softly. But loneliness isn't always a bad thing. It can be a time for reflection, for growth, for understanding yourself more deeply. And when it's balanced with love, with connection, with moments like these, well, it doesn't feel so heavy. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I'm glad you're here, Mom. I don't say it enough, but I mean it. I'm really glad you're here. The simplicity of her words, the honesty behind them, filled me with a warmth that I could not have anticipated. It was a quiet affirmation, a recognition of the bond we shared, and a testament to the subtle, patient way that love can heal even the deepest wounds. As the days passed and the new year approached, I found myself reflecting more and more on the lessons of that Christmas. I realized that the true power of love lies not in grand gestures, not in demands or ultimatums, but in its quiet persistence, in its ability to endure rejection, to withstand misunderstanding, to continue giving even when it feels unreciprocated. And in that endurance, in that steadfast presence, there is a form of strength, of victory that cannot be measured in words or actions alone. One snowy evening, I was preparing dinner in my small kitchen. I received a text from Marissa. Mom, can you come over tomorrow? I want to show you something. Curiosity piqued. I replied quickly, Of course, darling, I'll be there. The next day, I bundled up in my winter coat and drove to her apartment, the streets slick with ice and snow. When I arrived, she greeted me at the door, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Mom, she said, pulling me inside, I've been working on something for you. I want you to see it. She led me to the living room, where a small, carefully decorated table had been set up. On it were dishes I had taught her to make, arranged with care, and in the center was a small, hand-painted ornament. I made this for you, she said softly, holding it out. I wanted to thank you for everything, for being patient, for loving me, well, just for being you. I took the ornament in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the care she had put into it. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I smiled softly, holding it close. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, it's beautiful. Thank you. Truly. She smiled, a mixture of pride and relief in her expression. Mom, I think I'm finally starting to understand what Christmas really means. It's not about gifts or lists or expectations. It's about love. And you've always shown me that, even when I didn't see it. I felt my heart swell with emotion, a deep, quiet joy that only comes from seeing someone you love awaken to a truth they had overlooked. Darling, I said softly, that's all I've ever wanted. For you to see it, to feel it, to know it. And now you do, and that's the greatest gift I could ever receive. That night, as I drove home through the quiet, snow covered streets, I reflected on the journey we had taken together. From rejection to understanding, from pain to reconciliation, from hurt to quiet vindication. I realized that the subtle revenge I had sought, not through confrontation, not through anger, but through steadfast love, had accomplished more than any dramatic gesture ever could. It had healed, it had taught, it had reminded us both of the enduring power of presence, of patience, of care. And as I stepped inside my small, warm home, I knew that this Christmas, unlike any other, had given me something far greater than I could have imagined: the restoration of my bond with my daughter, and the profound understanding that love, when given freely and without expectation, has the power to heal, to teach, and to transform even the deepest of wounds. By the time January rolled around, Cedar Grove had settled into that quiet post holiday lull that always follows the rush and glitter of Christmas. The snow lay thick on the streets and the sun rose late, casting a pale, cold light across the rooftops and sidewalks. Inside my little house, I found myself thinking often about Marissa, about the subtle, extraordinary shift that had begun on that fateful Christmas Eve. There was something in her eyes now, a softness, a recognition, a quiet reverence for the years I had devoted to her, that warmed me more than any fire ever could. It wasn't just Marissa either. Something about the gentle reclamation of my presence seemed to ripple through the spaces around me. Even my neighbors, the ones I had exchanged polite hellos with for years, began to see me differently. I smiled more readily, lingered longer at the mailbox chatting with Mrs. Delaney about the snow, and found myself walking to the corner store just to breathe in the crisp winter air. And yet, always at the center of my thoughts was Marissa. She began inviting me to things I hadn't been part of, not just dinners or casual visits, but moments that felt intentional, moments she wanted me there for. There was the office party she had hesitated to include me in last year. This time she insisted. Mom, she said over the phone, I need you there. I want you to see how things are now, how I've learned, how I've grown. When I arrived at the party, I felt a flutter of nerves I hadn't felt in years. I smoothed my coat, checked my hair, and took a deep breath before entering the hall. It was bustling, full of laughter and music and the warm hum of conversation. And there, in the middle of it all, was Marissa, smiling, glowing in a dress that caught the light, her eyes searching for me. Mom, she called, and the crowd seemed to part as she came to me. She took my hands in hers, her grip warm and firm. I'm so glad you're here. I smiled, feeling the familiar ache of love mixed with pride. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, sweetheart. The evening passed in a blur of introductions and laughter. I met her colleagues, listened to her stories, and even joined in on a few lighthearted office games. And through it all, I realized something important. This was the subtle fruit of the quiet revenge I had chosen that Christmas Eve. By showing up, by contributing, by being present without expectation, I had reminded Marissa, and in some ways the world, that my love and presence were not to be dismissed. Later, as the party wound down, she pulled me aside. Mom, she said, her voice softer now, almost reverent, I want you to know I really understand now. All those years, I thought I knew what mattered. I thought contribution was about chores, about gifts, about lists. But you showed me it's about love. It's about presence. It's about heart. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I placed my hand gently on her cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. Darling, it's all right. We all learn in our own time. What matters is that you see it now. That's enough for me. The drive home was quiet. The streets were slick with ice, and the snow reflected the muted light of the street lamps, creating a kind of magic that made the world seem softer, gentler, more forgiving. I thought about Marissa, about the bond we had repaired, and about the quiet strength of patience and love. I realized that sometimes the most profound lessons aren't taught with words or anger or confrontation. They're taught with presence, with consistency, with quiet, unyielding love. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to our relationship. Marissa and I began cooking together more regularly. We experimented with new recipes, revisited old ones, and even started a small tradition of baking something together every Sunday. It was a simple act, yes, but it became a cornerstone of our renewed connection. She would laugh when I teased her about oversprinkling cinnamon or underflouring the dough, and I would marvel at how much she had grown, not just in skill, but in understanding, in empathy, in awareness of what it truly means to give and receive love. One Sunday, as we were rolling dough for a batch of cookies, she paused and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. Mom, can I ask you something? I nodded, smiling. Of course, sweetheart. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. Do you ever feel like your efforts go unnoticed? Like people don't see how much you give? I considered this carefully. It was a question I had pondered many times over the years. Yes, I admitted softly. Sometimes, but that's when you have to remind yourself that giving isn't always about recognition. It's about the act itself. The love you put into something, that's what counts. And sometimes, people see it eventually, even if it takes years. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I think I'm starting to understand that now, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. We continued baking in silence for a while, the quiet punctuated only by the soft rustle of flour and the occasional clink of a mixing spoon. And in that silence, I felt a profound sense of peace. The subtle, patient revenge I had enacted that Christmas Eve, showing up, contributing, being present, had achieved something far greater than I could have imagined. It had healed, it had taught, it had reminded both of us of the enduring power of love and presence. As January wore on, Marissa began including me in more aspects of her life. She invited me to help plan a small gathering for her friends, sought my advice on a work project, and even asked me to accompany her and Jeremy on a short weekend trip to a nearby town. Each invitation, each request, was a small acknowledgement of the years I had devoted to her, of the quiet love that had never wavered, even in the face of rejection. One evening, after a particularly long day at her apartment helping with preparations, we sat together by the fire, sipping tea and watching the snow fall outside. Marissa turned to me with a hesitant expression. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, darling, I replied, smiling gently. She took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. Do you ever regret it? All those years, all the effort, all the love? I considered this, feeling the weight of decades behind the question. No, sweetheart, not once. Every bit of it was worth it. Because loving you, well, it's the most natural thing in the world. And seeing you grow, seeing the person you've become, that's all the reward I need. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I think I'm finally starting to understand. I don't want to take you for granted anymore, Mom. And that's all right, I said gently. Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we need them most. Sometimes the lesson comes through rejection, sometimes through patience, sometimes through the quiet realization that love cannot be measured or denied. That night, as I drove home through the snow-covered streets of Cedar Grove, I reflected on the journey we had taken together. From rejection to understanding, from pain to reconciliation, from hurt to quiet vindication. I realized that the subtle revenge I had sought, not through confrontation, not through anger, but through steadfast love, had accomplished more than any dramatic gesture ever could. It had healed, it had taught, and it had reminded us both of the enduring power of presence, of patience, and of care. When I stepped inside my small, warm home, I knew that this period of our lives had given me something far greater than I could have imagined, the restoration of my bond with my daughter, and the profound understanding that love, when given freely and without expectation, has the power to heal, to teach, and to transform even the deepest of wounds. By late January, Cedar Grove had settled into the stillness that only a deep winter can bring. The snow lay thick and heavy on the roofs, blanketing the streets in muffled quiet, and the trees were bare, their skeletal branches dusted with frost. In my small house, there was a quiet rhythm to my days that I had grown accustomed to. Morning coffee, the soft hum of the heater, reading letters from old friends and relatives who still remembered me, and occasional visits to the little corner store where Mr. Tully always greeted me by name. But even in this rhythm, my thoughts frequently wandered to Marissa, to the delicate dance we had begun after that fateful Christmas Eve. The transformation in our relationship was not sudden, nor was it complete. There were moments when I still caught glimpses of the old sharpness in her expression, the flicker of judgment that had caused so much pain. But those moments were fewer, softer, and far easier to meet with patience now. I had learned that healing doesn't happen in a straight line. It ebbs and flows, revealing itself slowly, layer by layer. One particularly gray afternoon, Marissa called me unexpectedly. "Mom," she said, her voice slightly breathless, I, I need your help. Something's come up, and I think you're the only one I can talk to about it." Curiosity pricked at me, but I tried to temper my anticipation with calm. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It's Jeremy. Things aren't going smoothly. He's been stressed with work, and I think it's affecting how we relate to each other. I don't know how to handle it." I could hear the tension in her voice, the vulnerability that she rarely displayed. "Darling," I said softly, "relationships have their moments of strain. The important thing is to communicate, to be honest, and to remember why you're together. Love isn't always easy, but it's worth the effort when both people are willing to try." Her sigh was long and shaky. "I know, I didn't realize how much I needed to talk to you about these things. I feel like I've been holding it all inside, and it's heavy." I smiled gently. "Sweetheart, that's what mothers are for. You don't have to carry it alone." When I arrived at her apartment that evening, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of papers and a laptop before her, her expression tense and tired. "Mom," she said, looking up with relief, "thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to turn to." We sat together, sipping tea, and she began to speak, really speak, for the first time in a long while. She told me about Jeremy's recent stress at work, the arguments they had over small things that escalated, the feeling of being unheard and unappreciated. And as I listened, I felt a surge of both sorrow and compassion. It wasn't my place to judge, only to guide gently, to offer wisdom drawn from decades of experience. "Marissa," I said softly, "sometimes people get caught in their own frustrations, their own fears. It's easy to forget the good things when the pressure is high, but that's when you have to step back, take a breath, and remember why you're together. Communication is key, and patience, too. Patience is a form of love." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know, Mom. I needed to hear it from someone who's seen these things before, someone who knows." We spent hours talking that night, the snow falling silently outside her window, blanketing the world in quiet. I offered guidance, shared memories from my own life, and reminded her of the small gestures that build relationships over time. She listened, truly listened. And for the first time in many years, I felt that the bond between us had reached a new depth, one built not just on love, but on mutual understanding and trust. As the evening drew to a close, Marissa looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you enough for always being here, for never giving up on me, even when I pushed you away." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Darling, there's no need for thanks. Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing in the world. Seeing you grow, learning from your mistakes, finding your own way, that's all the reward I need." In the days that followed, our interactions grew even more intentional. Marissa began involving me in her life in ways she hadn't before, helping with dinner, seeking advice on work decisions, even inviting me to attend a small community event she had organized with Jeremy. Each act, each invitation was a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we had rebuilt, a recognition of the years I had devoted to her, and of the patient, subtle revenge that had begun that Christmas Eve. One afternoon, as we were baking together in her kitchen, she paused and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, do you ever feel like you failed?" I considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, yes, but failure isn't final. It's part of life, part of learning, part of growing. What matters is that you keep trying, that you remain present, that you continue to love even when it's hard." She nodded, absorbing the words, her eyes glistening. I think, I think I understand now. I've been so focused on what I thought I needed from people, what I thought I deserved, but I've been blind to what really matters. And you've always known." We continued baking in silence for a while, the quiet punctuated only by the soft rustle of flour and the occasional clink of a mixing spoon. And in that silence, I felt a profound sense of peace. The subtle, patient revenge I had enacted that Christmas Eve, showing up, contributing, being present, had accomplished something far greater than I could have imagined. It had healed, it had taught, and it had reminded both of us of the enduring power of presence, of patience, and of care. A few weeks later, Marissa invited me to her apartment for a small gathering with Jeremy and a few close friends. I arrived, my heart fluttering with both anticipation and quiet anxiety. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I was greeted with warmth, smiles, and laughter. Marissa looked radiant, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "Mom, I'm so glad you're here," she said, pulling me into a hug. The evening passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and small acts of kindness. I watched Marissa interact with her friends, guiding the conversation with grace and humor, and I felt a quiet pride swell in my chest. She had grown into a woman of depth and understanding, someone capable of both love and reflection, someone who had learned the value of presence and patience through experience. As the night wound down, Marissa pulled me aside. "Mom, I want to thank you again for being patient, for loving me, for showing me what really matters. I don't think I could have learned this without you." I smiled, feeling the familiar ache of love and pride. "Darling, you've learned this yourself. I only guided you. The understanding, the growth, it's yours. And I'm so proud of you." That night, as I drove home through the snow-covered streets of Cedar Grove, I reflected on the journey we had taken together. From rejection to understanding, from pain to reconciliation, from hurt to quiet vindication. I realized that the subtle revenge I had sought, not through confrontation, not through anger, but through steadfast love, had accomplished more than any dramatic gesture ever could. It had healed, it had taught, and it had reminded us both of the enduring power of presence, of patience, and of care. When I stepped inside my small, warm home, I knew that this period of our lives had given me something far greater than I could have imagined: the restoration of my bond with my daughter, and the profound understanding that love, when given freely and without expectation, has the power to heal, to teach, and to transform even the deepest of wounds. The weeks that followed felt like spring creeping into a long, bitter winter, even though the snow still clung stubbornly to the streets of Cedar Grove. There was a quiet rhythm to my life now, one that felt richer, warmer, and more profound than it had in years. Marissa and I had settled into a new understanding, a gentle balance that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Love had been restored, but it had taken more than apologies or gestures. It had taken patience, presence, and yes, a subtle kind of quiet insistence that one's worth cannot be ignored. It was on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the light falls golden and soft through frosted windows, that I realized the depth of the journey we had taken. Marissa had called me over asking for help with something she described only vaguely, and when I arrived, she was standing in her living room, nervously wringing her hands. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about everything. About Christmas, about us, about how I treated you." She looked at me, eyes glistening, and I saw in them a vulnerability I had rarely seen in a grown woman. "I want you to know something." I tilted my head, smiling softly. "Of course, darling. What is it?" She paused, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, worn envelope. She handed it to me, her fingers trembling slightly. "Open it," she said. "Please." I took it gently, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The envelope was addressed in her handwriting, neat but slightly shaky, and inside I found a single sheet of paper. I unfolded it carefully and began to read. It was a letter. Not a long one, but every word was heavy with meaning. She wrote about her regrets, about the nights she had spent thinking she was justified in her harshness, about the moments she had failed to see my love. She spoke of the ways she had misunderstood contribution, of the pride that had blinded her to the quiet, steady work of years. And then at the end, she wrote something that made my chest ache with a mix of joy and sorrow. "Mom, I finally understand. You didn't need my acknowledgement to know your worth. You didn't need my approval to show your love. But I need you to know now, for me, that I see it. I see you. And I am grateful beyond words. I love you." I folded the letter slowly, pressing it to my chest. The tears I had held back for so long spilled freely now, warm and healing. I looked up at Marissa, and she was watching me with an expression that was equal parts hope and fear. Hope that I would forgive, fear that I would not. I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly, letting the warmth of our shared presence mend the last remnants of the hurt. Darling, I whispered, I have always known your heart, and I have always loved you. That's never been in question. But now I see yours too, and it fills me with joy. We held each other for a long while, the kind of embrace that speaks without words, the kind that heals the soul. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The revenge I had taken that Christmas Eve, the one I had imagined as subtle and clever, wasn't revenge at all. It was love. It was persistence. It was a demonstration, not of my anger or my hurt, but of my enduring commitment. And in the end, it had taught Marissa something she would carry for the rest of her life: that love cannot be denied, that patience is a quiet kind of power, and that the heart always knows the truth, even when the mind forgets. Over the following months, our lives continued in this new rhythm. We cooked together, laughed together, and shared small, quiet moments that became the backbone of our renewed bond. Marissa often spoke to me about Jeremy, about her work, about the challenges and triumphs she experienced, and I listened, offering guidance when asked, support when needed, and, always, love without condition. One day, as we were baking her favorite lemon bars, she looked at me thoughtfully. Mom, do you ever think about how different things might have been if I had treated you better sooner? I smiled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. Yes, darling. But life has a way of teaching lessons when we need them most. Sometimes it takes a mistake. Sometimes it takes a harsh word. Sometimes it takes a quiet revelation like that Christmas Eve. What matters is that we've learned, and that we've grown. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, and I took her hands in mine. And I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, not just for understanding, but for the love and compassion you're showing now. That's the truest sign of growth. The seasons changed, as they always do, and with them came new joys, new challenges, and new moments of connection. Marissa and I celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and small victories, always with the awareness that our bond had been tested and strengthened in ways that only love and patience could accomplish. Looking back now, I realize that Christmas Eve, with all its hurt and rejection, had been a turning point not just for Marissa, but for me as well. I had learned that love is not diminished by anger or denial, that presence is more powerful than argument, and that the quiet insistence of the heart can be the most profound form of vindication. And so, as I sit here now, in my small house with the winter light streaming through my windows, I reflect on the journey of that long ago Christmas. I remember the sting of rejection, the ache of being unappreciated, and the subtle thrill of showing up anyway, of offering love without expectation. And I understand, more deeply than ever, that the true measure of a parent, of a mother, of anyone who loves, is not in what is returned, but in what is given freely, patiently, and unconditionally. Marissa comes to visit often now, bringing laughter, warmth, and the occasional flower-dusted apron. She cooks, she talks, she listens, and she loves in ways that show she has carried the lesson forward. And in those moments, when we sit together in quiet companionship, I feel a profound sense of peace. The hurt has faded into memory, the lesson has been learned, and the bond between us has become something unbreakable. That Christmas Eve, when my daughter denied me food and dismissed my contribution, I thought I was taking revenge. I thought I was teaching a lesson. But in truth, the greatest lesson was for both of us. The greatest victory was love. Quiet, patient, enduring love that could not be denied, and that could heal even the deepest wounds. And in that love, in that quiet presence, I found not only my own vindication, but the unshakable truth that some gifts like love, patience, and understanding cannot be measured, cannot be taken for granted, and cannot ever be forgotten. Because love, in its purest form, is the most profound revenge of all.